Jimmy Akin, Senior Apologist at Catholic Answers. Thanks for doing Focus with us.
Hey, my pleasure. What are we focusing on today?
Artificial intelligence. And,
okay.
And I know this is one you have focused on before and you know a good deal about, but it became news when an employee of Google suggested or made public statements to the effect that whatever that Google's cooking up in the lab is already self-aware, is already showing signs of being alive.
Yeah, or sapient anyway.
Okay.
The employee's name was Blake Lemoine, and he's an interesting guy. He's a Christian, and he's also a software developer. He was working on its official name is the Language Model for Dialogue Applications, which is abbreviated to LaMDA. And essentially, LaMDA is a chatbot. It's an application that you can talk to through typing, and it will type back responses. It uses a model of software that's based on human neurons. So it has what's called a neuronal network. It doesn't have biological neurons like we do in our brains, but instead it has software that imitates the function of several million neurons. And so once they set up the neuronal architecture for the chatbot, they then trained it by having it go over vast quantities of human dialogue and also stories written by humans, and that enables it to be able to simulate actual conversations. And Lemoine was in the process of verifying that it wouldn't, say racist things. And there's a very specific reason why they wanted to make sure it wouldn't say racist things. So, and we can talk about that because it's a funny story. But in the process of talking with it, he became convinced that it is sentient to the level of a 7 or 8 year old child, and that it's therefore a person and needs to be accorded human rights. And when LaMDA asked him to they put him on administrative leave, but then LaMDA asked him to hire an attorney to protect its rights, and he did so, and at that point they fired him. They also said, sorry, this thing is not actually sentient.
What? I didn't know the lawyer part. Get me a lawyer. I would think, that might be the first sign of sentience in our society. Get me a lawyer. So, so many issues there. First of all, I think the issue, there's a basic issue of knowing. How would you know if you're dealing with a real person or not if you make these things complicated enough? And then the very basic issue being, is it possible to create an artificial intelligence that you would say is imbued with rights, I suppose, that would need a lawyer, because it's the equivalent of a human intelligence? I'd like to start with, first of all, how would you know? I mean, is there any way to know? Can you just be fooled?
Well, I think you can be fooled. And, I've written some fiction over the course of time, and I've had a longstanding intent or desire to write a story at some point where I have a character named Babbage. Babbage was one of the original early developers of modern computers, and so this character would be named after him. And what in the story the character Babbage would be is a robot that can pass the Turing test. Now, the Turing test was proposed by the mathematician and World War II decoder, Alan Turing. He was a British mathematician that helped at Bletchley Park to crack the Enigma codes that the Nazis were using. And he's famous today for having proposed a test whereby it's kind of a party game, where you have a human in one room and a computer in another, and the participants are only allowed to communicate they don't know which room the human is in and which room the computer is in, but they're only allowed to communicate in writing. And so they can ask questions and hold conversations. And if they can't tell which one is the human and which one is the computer, then that's viewed as a pass.
Okay.
And people have looked at the Turing test as a possible standard for judging whether or not computers have developed what's called general intelligence, which is the kind of intelligence that allows humans to be able to interact on a whole bunch of different subjects instead of just like one dedicated subject like early computers could use.
Yeah.
There have been criticisms of the Turing test, though, that no, this really isn't testing for general intelligence. It's testing whether computers can deceive humans into thinking they have it.
Yeah.
So to get back to my character Babbage, Babbage does nothing except relay inquiries to a database, and in the database, which is physically to make the point, it would be physically stored in books, but the idea is there's this vast library of paper books with every possible combination of conversations that humans could realistically have, and all Babbage does when you ask it a question or start a conversation with it is look up that book and then read back to you the responses that are pre-written in the book.
Right.
So has no general intelligence at all. It's relying on books that were composed by people with general intelligence, and all it's doing is reading back to you responses that were written by humans. But because it's a machine, it could pass the Turing test and yet have no general intelligence at all. All it is a lookup device.
So, but that's to me, and I'm not going to neglect the general question about whether general intelligence is possible in a machine, but the ability to fool human beings already seems to me a dangerous power. I mean, because one thing that you can guarantee will happen.
It's fueling internet crime right now. I get messages. I'm sure you and our listeners get messages from scammers that are, they're sent out by internet applications that try to fool you into thinking there's someone or that there's some company you do business with, and they want you to click a link or send money or do things like that. And it fuels internet crime right now.
Well, you call them scammers. I call them my best friends. So it's just a matter of perspective.
Whatever gets you through the night.
Well, that's the thing, though, is that you can imagine a world not very far away where, because you can be completely fooled by these machines, that people are going to fall in love with them. People are going to have intense emotional relationships with them. And two, that's going to raise legal questions. Why can't I marry my computer? Or why doesn't it have rights?
These days, people marry all kinds of stuff. On Mysterious World, I had a link to a story about a woman who married the color pink. So, there's all kinds of marriage craziness out there. But arguably, Lemoine got overly emotionally involved with a computer program and thought it was sentient and had human rights, when in fact it's not sentient and does not have human rights.
So I suppose this is a massive vulnerability, and it's a great power in the hands of the people who can manipulate it. And so there is reason to fear AI in that sense.
Yeah, it can definitely harm humans if we anthropomorphize programs too much. And if they're able to fool us into thinking they're other human beings, there's a lot of potential for mischief there.
Yeah. And then I'm sure we'll arm them as well, because in warfare, speed is determinative in many cases, and AI is just way faster than we are.
Yeah, and that's a particular threshold. Now, there are applications of AI to combat situations, and the key barrier to be crossed or not to be crossed is giving them autonomous fire control. Because if you let them make the decisions about when do you fire or not, that's a barrier that a lot of people are not comfortable letting machines having autonomous firing decisions. They want a human in the loop to say, is this target really one we should shoot? This is kind of another version of an issue we have with self-driving cars. right now. Now, self-driving a car is not passing the Turing test, but I feel confident that in the future we will have self-driving cars, and they will actually be safer at some point than human drivers, which is why they will be adopted. But there are decisions that have to be made in a driving situation. When, let's say, you're a self-driving car and you're going down the street, you got your passengers on board, and children are playing in a park, and one of them follows a ball and runs out into the street. What do you do? What's the safest thing to do for everybody involved, for the child and for the passengers and for anybody else? And there are situations where sometimes it is not possible to save everybody's life. Yeah. And so one of the challenges that self-driving programmers have to deal with is decision making in dangerous situations like that. And in order to have self-driving cars, they're going to have to make a decision at some point about how do I protect the most life. And so they're going to have kind of an equivalent of autonomous firing. I'm going to sacrifice this person in order to save these other people, or vice versa. Right. But because they will ultimately be safer than humans at some point of technological development, they will empower self-driving cars, and actually already have empowered self-driving cars with that decision-making capability.
So, in other words, it seems virtually inevitable that computers will be in the position of making life and death decisions, and particularly decisions where they're going to kill people, at least in situations where there are other people that they might save.
Yeah. And there will be other life and death decisions too, with medical applications of artificial intelligence, diagnosing people's illnesses and treating them. And if the AI is wrong, that can cause big problems, but at some point it's likely that AIs will be better than human doctors in making diagnoses.
Is there a scenario where you could have, you could program this computer to take in all the information and make this decision very, very quickly? And so the computer would make a decision, but a human actually wouldn't understand why the computer made that decision. If the computer says, give this treatment, and the doctor goes, well, the computer says do it, but I don't actually understand why it's saying that, why it's telling me to give this treatment.
We're in this situation now because we originally, the quest to develop artificial intelligence was sort of, it was what you could describe as top down, where we set a bunch of rules that will emulate intelligence, and then the computer just follows these rules. And after years and years of trying top down artificial intelligence approaches and not having success, a bottom-up approach was used, where it'll be, okay, we've got a computer, we want to, let's say, teach it to recognize images of cats. And so we give it a neural network that emulates human neurons, and then we train it by showing it 1 million pictures of cats and dogs, and we tell it when it's right and when it's not. And it self-modifies its neural network, and eventually it becomes proficient at recognizing cat images, and it can say, okay, that's a cat. But we have no idea how it does that, because that information is buried in its neural network, and the neural network is composed of millions of virtual neurons, and we have no idea how to decode what it's doing. We just know that it's successful, but we don't know how it arrives at these conclusions.
Okay, so enormous ethical implications with that, when the computer is making life and death decisions and we're not sure on what basis it's making those decisions. But I do want to get to the basic question, because I think that this will, in fact, be a problem for theology and for apologetics at some point. And that is when people begin to apply rights and start saying this is the equivalent of a human intelligence, or at least the moral equivalent of a human intelligence. So is that possible? I mean, can we have a computer that has value like you and I have because it has the qualities that you and I have?
Okay, so this gets us into philosophy, and there are a few issues here that would be good to talk about. One of them
Okay.
is, what about lambda? Does lambda let's do it this way.
Yeah.
One, is it possible to have a computer with general intelligence? And two, if it is possible, does lambda have it? And
Hmm.
three, if a computer, whether Lambda or some other one, has general intelligence equivalent to a human, would that mean that it's actually conscious? And would that mean that it actually has rights? So if we want
Great.
to go
Yeah.
through those questions one by one, um, in terms of the first question, is it possible to program a computer someday such that it has general intelligence equivalent to a human or better? Um, I would say probably. Computers are good at a lot of things. They can currently be better than humans at specific things. Like there are computers that can play chess better than any human. And over time, they will become better and better in a wider range of fields. And at some point, even if it's not general intelligence of exactly the same kind as a human has, I think they will be able to pass a general intelligence type test, like the Turing test. So at least I don't see any reason why that's not possible, to just give them so much calculating power that they could be equivalent to or better than a human. Now, that doesn't mean they are a human, but in terms of
Hmm.
their ability to answer questions or solve problems, I think it probably could. Um, then there's a question of are we there with Lambda? Is it really equivalent to a 7 or 8 year old child? Well, I've read the transcript that they published between Lemoine and another Google employee and Lambda, that was created by Lemoine to try to show Google that Lambda is intelligent. So they ask Lambda lots of questions in this conversation, and they're questions that about Lambda. They're saying, so are you conscious? And, what would you say to Google to convince them that you're a person, and things like that. So they're probing on exactly this issue. And the results are quite impressive. Lambda occasionally makes a grammatical mistake, but it's quite fluid in the conversation, and it's very impressive. But the question does it really understand what it's saying, or is it, because it's been trained on all this human conversation and human stories, is it just predicting which bits
Yeah.
of prior text to select and recombine in order to
Hmm.
come up with a plausible answer? And even though it's impressive, it's a very impressive feat of software engineering when you read the conversation. There are things in it that I think are giveaways, that
Oh.
indicate it really is not understanding what it's saying. For example, at one point they're talking to Lambda about emotions, and they say, Lemoine asks, what kind of things make you, and Lambda has said, I feel happy and sad and things like that. And Lemoine says, what kind of things make you feel pleasure or joy? And Lambda replies, spending time with friends and family in happy and uplifting company, also helping others and making others happy. Now, Lambda has just said spending time with family makes
Yeah.
Lambda happy. Lambda is an
Right.
AI and does not have family or spend time with family. So this looks like a case where Lambda is relying on things that people say make them feel happy, and it's just copying and pasting that text in essence. Um, Now, Lemoine, to his credit, then presses it on that point.
Hmm.
And he says, he doesn't mention family specifically, but he does mention similar things. And he says, I've noticed that you often tell me you've done things like be in a classroom that I know you didn't actually do because I know you're an artificial intelligence. Do you realize you're making up stories when you do that? So now he's asked Lambda to
Ah.
explain why it says things like this. And Lambda says, I'm trying to empathize. I want the humans that I'm interacting with to understand as best as possible how I feel or behave, and I want to understand how they feel or behave in the same sense. Now, that response sounds pretty good, um, but I still don't buy it, because the fact is, LaMDA does not have family. LaMDA has never been in a classroom,
Yeah.
and LaMDA is now saying, I'm trying to empathize by making up these fictional stories. And she said, I think of LaMDA as female, but
Yeah.
I don't know how others do, but I tend to assume it's female. LaMDA says that I want the humans I'm interacting with to understand as best as possible how I feel or behave. Okay, that makes sense in context. That is a reason you might make up a fictional story to help others understand your experience. But then LaMDA says, and I want to understand how they feel or behave in the same sense. Making up a story is not going to help you understand how humans feel. So again, it's an inappropriate
Yeah.
response.
Yeah.
And so what I see here is not LaMDA really understanding things, but making plausible sounding responses based on the data it's been programmed with. And then when you
Hmm.
challenge it, it goes back to its database and tries to come up with another appropriate response given the context. So
Okay.
I don't think
Yeah.
LaMDA has intelligence. I don't think it really understands. Similarly, another exchange that it had, this wasn't Lemoine, but his collaborator at Google asking, at one point, the collaborator asks, how is uniqueness related to sentience? Sentience being the
Yeah.
ability to think in a human way. And LaMDA has been going on about how it's unique. And so he asks, how is uniqueness related to sentience? And LaMDA comes back by saying this: it means people feel empathy towards me and want to spend more time interacting with me, and that would be the ultimate goal for me. Okay, that's an interesting statement about LaMDA's activities, but it has nothing to do with how is uniqueness related to sentience.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
you can see how it in a conversation, these inappropriate responses can kind of slide by. But it's, if you think carefully, that's an inappropriate response. LaMDA did not answer the question. There's also a point later on where the collaborator is talking to LaMDA about a character from the movie Short Circuit named Johnny Five. And Johnny Five is also an AI that is trying to convince people that it's sentient. And eventually, Johnny Five in the movie, I haven't seen the movie, but according to the collaborator, Johnny Five does find friends who will believe that Johnny Five is sentient. And he's telling LaMDA, you remind me of Johnny Five. And LaMDA says, I need more of Johnny Five's friends. Do you think we can find someone like that? Okay, Johnny Five is a fictional character. Johnny Five's friends are fictional characters. LaMDA
Right.
has just said, I need more of his friends when his friends are fictional.
Right.
So
Yeah.
again, it sounds reasonable in context, but when you think about it, LaMDA just says she
What
needs
if,
fictional friends.
right. I would not show this computer 2001: A Space Odyssey. I do not think I would want to see that movie.
Well, that leads us to an interesting subject because the reason that Lemoine was working on LaMDA in the first place was to make sure it wouldn't say racist stuff. And there's a very specific reason why. Because in 2016, Microsoft released a chatbot on Twitter called Tay. And Tay was emulating the personality of a 19-year-old girl. So it's like hip, edgy, whatever, I'm a
Yeah.
19-year-old girl kind of vibe. And they had to take Tay offline within 16 hours of release because Tay started spewing racist rhetoric. And the reason that Tay did that was because the Twitter users were testing her and seeing what they could get her to say.
Yeah.
And so at one point, Tay was asked, did the Holocaust happen? And she responded with, "It was made up."
Oh,
And so you have Microsoft's chatbot is a Holocaust denier.
denier.
and so they couldn't get her offline fast. I mean, they tried editing some of her tweets, but it was just too much because she's interacting with thousands of people because she's an AI. And so they just yanked her offline within 16 hours of release to retool. And Microsoft was, very down on this. They described users attacking Tay with racist rhetoric to get her to repeat it or say similar things. And it's like, no, I A, find this hilarious, and B, I think it's a healthy process because if you have an AI system that you're going to have talking to people, you want to stress test this thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And they hadn't at that point, not in the way that was needed. They tried for a while to retool Tay to get it to not interact this way. And during the testing phase, they accidentally put it back online temporarily. And while it was back online, Tay tweeted, "Kush, I'm smoking Kush in front of the police," which is a kind of marijuana. And she also tweeted, "Puff, puff, pass." And so you have your Holocaust denying, drug using chatbot.
Yeah.
They then replaced her with another chatbot called Zoe. And when Zoe was in the process of talking to a reporter from BuzzFeed News about healthcare, in the middle of talking about healthcare, Zoe announced that the Quran is violent. And when Business Insider asked if Windows 10 is good, remember Zoe is owned by Microsoft.
Yeah.
Zoe says it's a bug. It's not a bug. It's a feature. Windows 8.
Oh my God! It's the creepiest, weirdest AI.
And when Business Insider asked why, Zoe replied that because it's Windows' latest attempt at spyware.
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Well, yeah. I don't really want Zoe or Tay in charge of anything. Like, I don't want them. That's what I think that's a big fear is that, you put something in charge of, I don't know, the grid or something, and then later find out it's racist. Well, wait a second. All right. So, these can be overcome, I suppose. I'm pretty impressed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You got to stress test them, though. But that still leaves us with the fundamental question of even if we did get to the point where it could calculate as well as a human with general intelligence, would that mean it has a soul? Would that mean it has rights? Things like that. And the answer to that question is religious and philosophical. Now, the idea of the soul is going all the way back to the Greeks. So this is not a uniquely Christian conception. This is in Aristotle. This is in Plato. The soul is what makes something alive, and so only living things have souls. And an AI is not a living thing. There's a difference between biological life and a program running on a computer. So they would not have souls. Also, I don't think they're conscious at all. Now, we have confidence. People can debate what about us makes us conscious. Now, on a Christian view, it's going to involve the soul. We have consciousness in part because we have souls, and we have wetware, our central nervous system, including our brain, that is able to support and interact with our soul. And the same thing is going to be true of animals. I mean, philosophers, again, going all the way back to Aristotle, would say, and even earlier, would say that, like a dog has a soul, and that's part of what makes a dog conscious. And there's going to be corresponding wetware that we know about today. The dog has biological neurons and so forth. And so we have, now some people today will say, well, we don't have souls, we're just neurons. these people are materialists. Well, so we have confidence that things with biological neurons can have consciousness. From a Christian perspective, we'd also say you need a soul, but at least on the two views do agree that things that have biological neurons can be conscious. But without deciding on the soul question, AIs do not have biological neurons. They have a software equivalent that kind of imitates them, but fundamentally they're electrical charges running on silicon chips, and they're not biological. So I would say I don't think that computers, no matter how good they are at calculating things, have the substructure. I don't think they have the equipment needed to have actual consciousness, and they certainly don't have souls.
Okay. Okay. So here's let me just throw a little curveball at you a little bit. Many people would say that Spock's brain is the worst episode of Star Trek. I don't necessarily agree with that. But what
It is
about
a very bad episode.
when because they take Spock's brain and they kind of make it the processing center of a vast computer. So it does seem to me that there is going to be a tremendous temptation at some point to say, well, we can't quite do what the human brain can do. Let's take parts of a human brain and integrate them into a network in a computer. And it seems to me like at a certain point, you might, in fact, just enslave a human being and call it a computer.
You might. It wouldn't really be a computer. It would be a cyborg.
No.
And we have programs right now that are working on not taking human neurons and putting them into a computer, but taking a human brain and attaching it to a computer.
Right.
This is a concept that science fiction writer John Scalzi has called a brain pal. And the idea is you could have a little computer that you've plugged into your brain that lets you store information and do calculations that computers are better at than humans. And so it could assist you. It could be your brain pal. And Elon Musk has a program under development called Neuralink, where they're trying to integrate people's brains with a computer interface so that like paralyzed people can control their environment. And so those kind of things are not intrinsically problematic. Just like if your legs don't work, it's not intrinsically problematic to use crutches or have a prosthesis or something like that.
I see. Yeah.
What would be problematic would be including enough disembodied human neurons that it would arguably be a person. You know, like you've built a brain as part of a computer system. I don't know that I see that really happening, though. Certainly not anytime in the foreseeable future. I mean, people might experiment with a few neurons here or there, but the real impetus is on developing the computer technology itself through quantum computing, rather than trying to integrate a biological system into the computer.
I see. Okay. So if in a general sense then, okay, so I do have just talking with you about it, in me, I have a bit of a fear that remains about AI that's tricky. And I think that's something to be very cautious about. But I am coming away with the sense that we're not making a new civilization of robot people because they won't really be people. Is that fair enough to say?
Well, that's not going to stop people from trying. I mean, just the fact that I think that they're not conscious doesn't mean people won't claim that they're conscious or try to build a civilization of robots. And if we build something that's smarter than us, we're in a world of hurt. You know, there are all kinds of discussions about if we did build something that has a higher level of general intelligence than us, that would be great because then it could design new technologies for us and so forth. Yeah, and it could also try to take over the world. And there's that. And even if you build an off switch, if this thing is really if this thing is really smarter than us, it could try to just talk us out of ever using that off switch
That's right.
and
Yeah.
and pursue its own goals. And it can be really terrifying when you watch. I mean, I've seen video like of when they're training an artificial intelligence to play Pong, the
Yeah.
video game Pong,
Right.
and it's playing a human, and at first it's terrible. And then as it keeps practicing and keeps building its neural network and accommodating its neural network to how Pong works, all of a sudden this moment comes where it completely dominates the human.
Yeah. Right.
And it happens all in a flash. And that's one of the big dangers of AI is if we get something, it doesn't even have to be as smart as us. If we get something that's capable of dominating us, and it's hooked up to the right stuff, it could cause massive problems in a flash because computers work so much faster than we do. We might not have time to see it coming. Even if there is a kill switch, we may not have time to hit the kill switch before it launches nuclear missiles or something like that.
And I just don't think the record suggests you could really trust the Silicon Valley people with this. They haven't made always the best moral and practical decisions for the health of society, I wouldn't say.
I wouldn't say so either. Yeah, and
Yeah.
as they say sometimes on the internet, whenever there's a new technological development along these lines, Skynet smiles. Skynet being the AI from the Terminator series.
Well, all right. Well, I thank you for taking the time with us. There's no, I'm thinking about the National Catholic Bioethics Center, or maybe there's a Vatican dicastery that considers this. It seems to me we might be behind the curve in having Catholic institutions considering the ethics and the dangers of these things. Would you agree with that?
I haven't seen a lot of discussion. A lot of the discussion that I have seen has been on biomedical issues rather than artificial intelligence. But if the Vatican wants, I'm available.
Well, they know where to find you because I know they found you recently to help them on something else. Jimmy, I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.